Three, two, one, and we are live on Counterbalance. Mike Duran, I'm here with Gadi Taub. Gadi,
Wow.
today is, hi, today is the Deep State edition of
Yeah,
Counterbalance.
it is.
And we are here to talk to you about the Israeli Deep State.
You know, you can look at the surface. You don't even have to go to the deep state, because the deep state is no longer submerged in Israel. Um, I call it bagatzokratia, because bagatz is our high court of appeal, and kratia is a form of government. So, and it's not mine. It's Shlomo Avineri, actually, the Israel's premier political scientist, who invented this name. But the first thing to know about this is, first of all, we are now in the midst of an unbelievable event, because the Supreme Court has basically accepted the results, has admitted the results of the elections for consideration. And it may nullify them. We don't know.
You mean
At this point.
it is accepted to hear in a Supreme
Yeah.
Court hearing whether the results of the elections are acceptable.
Yeah, and they'll probably rule that they're acceptable. And the thing is that this is a earth-shattering political decision, and we're all pretending as if this is a matter of interpreting the law, because the specific debate is about whether Netanyahu can form a government despite the fact that he's under indictments.
Wait. Let me, everyone needs to understand that you are an actor in this drama. You're a major, I'm going to call you, your humility is going to say, I'm a small cog or whatever. I know, you're an actor in this drama. So it's all, everything is very clear to you. We gotta open the aperture a little bit, and you just gotta walk people through, because you're talking to Americans here, mainly foreigners.
Okay.
Walk us through. Let's start with, tell us what happened this week, just the major events, and then we'll get to what your role in them.
Okay. I'm just a pundit, so and I went to speak in demonstrations. So yeah, how do you tell this story from the beginning? I'd like to start with the general, not from this week, and to say that unlike any other democracy, Israel's judiciary has usurped the authority to make the final arbitration of everything. Everything, including everything. You can appeal to the Supreme Court about law, an act, a bill, a law, an administrative action, an action by the executive branch. Anything is
your breakfast,
justiciable.
Your toothpaste.
Justiciable, is that how we discuss this, if there's a word in English? Everything is acceptable to be considered by the court. So there's no limit to its authority. It also exercises judicial review, or at least admitted for consideration, a basic law, which is our substitute of a constitution. So this branch of government, there's no limit to its authority, and there is no check and no balance against it, including the judges actually have veto power over their own colleagues. So the court is extreme on the liberal side, and it only grudgingly allows a conservative judge once in a while. So that now we have 11 judges sitting to debate the results of the elections, the right of Netanyahu to form a government, and 2 of them are conservative. 9 of them are liberal, most of them extremely liberal.
Now I saw I saw you have on your YouTube channel a video of you giving a speech, in which you made the point you just made, that everyone is extremely liberal, and you said that they represent, they're not just liberal, but they represent 5% of the population
of the electorate.
Of the electorate.
My friend, the left center pundit of Yediot Achronot, Ben-Dor Yamini, a very important journalist in Israel, just wrote last week, these judges are doing their best to convince us that they represent the party of Meretz. Meretz is the most extreme left-wing party in our parliament. It has somewhere around, if it runs alone, it has somewhere around 4 or 5 seats in our parliament, and the judges are mostly there. The
You,
judges
you think,
nullified
you
our
think Esther Hayut, do you think the president of the Supreme Court, do you think she votes for Meretz? Is that her?
I don't know. I'm not sure. She's very careful, and she's very savvy politicians, and they have become politicians. The court is a political player, and so. But you have this is the context in which this is happening. The context is that we are not really a democracy, strictly speaking. So when Americans say Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, well, it's the closest to being a democracy for sure, but it's very liberal and not necessarily very democratic, because we have a very small cadre of a very specific elite that holds most of the power. And this has been described by Menachem Mauter, another liberal scholar of the law, in a book which elucidated the thesis that the left has lost the elections in 1977 and has been losing them consistently since. And so what it did is it adopted the idea of judicial supremacy, or the ideology of judicial supremacy, and then it conquered the court. So while we were attempting to conquer the Knesset, they were trying to conquer the judiciary, to overtake the judiciary.
So you think this was a conscious strategy?
Yeah. We had Aaron Barak was the Chief Justice for many years, and he would make John Marshall look like a blushing virgin. He is, I think, the most activist judge ever. I think it was Judge Richard Posner who read his book and called him a judicial pirate, because he basically advanced the idea that everything is justiciable or judiciable or whatever it is. Anything is accepted for the court for debate, and the court is the arbiter of the maker of the last decision. And also, and this is very interesting, because I spent many of these years trying to write polemics against postmodernism, and what he did, people refer to the judicial gadgets, and they're important, how he did this step by step. But the most important thing he did is advance a theory in which he says that words have no specific meaning before they are interpreted.
That's postmodernism.
Absolutely. That's Humpty Dumpty, saying to Alice, how can you tell what a word means before I tell you what it means? So he actually has a theory in which he allowed himself to say that sometimes you can interpret a text in direct opposition to the literal meaning of the words, because you have to understand its soul, its essence. The text is just the body, and there is a soul around it, and the soul changes over time. So what this does, and it's an interesting theory, because it changes. It says that every law has a specific goal, and the goal is always in a live context of a changing society. So you always need a judge.
That's the same. We have the similar concept here of the living constitution, and it's the Supreme Court that decides what these words mean now.
But your version is very, very tame, because our version is, I have a friend who's a businessman, and he's in high tech, and he does a lot of business in Israel and outside Israel, and all his contracts specify that in any disagreement, they will be decided by a court of law in the United Kingdom. Because since in Israel, judges can, when I was part in a proceeding that needed a court, it was about a screenplay, and there was a controversy about the rights and stuff, and I was a minor participant in all that. But so we hired the producers hired a very expensive lawyer, and he told us very simply, he says, look, a court in Israel is a casino. You do not know what the rules are until the judge sets them. And the thing is, we have all been thinking of the judges as, and they've been cultivating this image as sitting there in the Olympian sphere of justice, aloof from all of us. And they've been cultivating this image that, politicians, they have interests and they have passions,
right.
and judges they are disinterested and they're not in the fray, they're above it. And now the thing is, they broadcasted the debate about this election, and suddenly we saw them. And it was, first of all, it's like C-SPAN. You get the whole thing, and it had 1 million views. Let me remind you that Israel is a country of 10 million people. So it had 1 million views. People were transfixed, and it looked absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. These people are, with all serious, we have to at this point say what the actual debate is about in the court. So the debate is about, can Netanyahu form a government despite the fact that he was indicted? Okay, that seems like a fair enough question.
It was actually two things, was it not? It was whether Netanyahu can form the government while under indictment, but then there were also legal questions posed about the coalition agreement between Netanyahu and
which is just as bad. But the most telling thing is, look, what part of the Barak revolution is that anyone can appeal to the Supreme Court. So if you don't like something that any branch of the government did, you can take a taxi to Jerusalem, and on the way you can sketch an appeal and you can hand it to the Supreme Court, and they are very likely to debate it.
So just in contrast to our system, in our system, it has to first be heard by a lower court. There has to be an actual legal case, and you have to have in order to get it to the Supreme Court, you have to have standing in the case. You have to be directly affected by it. You can't just say, I'm Gadi and I don't like the coalition agreement and I'm going to take it to the Supreme Court. But you can do that in Israel?
You can do that in Israel. And the idea is you have I don't know if appealer is the word, but you have what they call a public appealer. So if I think it is the public interest to change this coalition agreement, so they don't, the public, nobody counts the elections as expressing the public interest. There is this Eliad Shraga guy who has an NGO for transparency and something in government, and he always appears before the court. So he half runs the country because he appeals based on the public interest. So the public interest is what this guy says it is. It's not something else. So they appealed this before the elections. And the Supreme Court, you know what they did? They said, this is a theoretical question because we don't know who will win the election, and we don't know if Netanyahu is to form a government. So your appeal is not specific. So we're not going to debate it now. And then after the elections, Netanyahu won, or Netanyahu is the only one able to form a government, and now they're debating it. So imagine this. We're sitting there, and 2.5 million people voted for Netanyahu, and the court doesn't tell us if we can or cannot have him as a prime minister. They will decide only after we go. They can decide after the elections that the elections are null and void, that we voted, that our vote doesn't count anymore. And also, it's worth saying that the law is very specific on the question if you can or cannot form a government under indictment, because the Barak court has forced Aryeh Deri, then minister and now minister also, it forced him to resign when he was indicted. And this is called the Halachat Deri-Pinchasi. It's the Deri-Pinchasi ruling, and this created a reaction in the legislative branch, where they changed the basic law of government to say specifically that a prime minister only needs to resign after he is convicted after the last appeal. Only then does he have to quit.
Otherwise, some activist prosecutor could put together an indictment that might not ever make it through the courts, but on the basis of that, topple a government, and that would not be democracy.
Exactly. So the law says this, and now the public appealers are saying, well, that's about a sitting prime minister, but what about someone who is just a member of Knesset and is about to form a government? And this is more ridiculous than you can imagine, because there is a specific law that tells you what to do if someone charged with and tasked with forming a government has actually been indicted, and in what kind of court he is to be his case should be heard. So there is no
Oh,
lacuna.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
I thought I've been following this issue, but not really closely. I thought there was a slight opening that,
Well, there isn't.
where you couldn't topple a sitting prime minister, but there's a question about one who goes to form a new government. Because there's half a second there where he's not, some nanosecond where he's not prime minister.
And well, it's not a coincidence that you think so, because half the liberal press is singing this song, and I don't know how many times I tweeted that this is bollocks, and I'm not the only one. Amit Segal, a journalist whom you followed, said immediately there is a very clear law about this. The Supreme Court could just throw this appeal out and say, and the thing is that there was no law. The Supreme Court created a precedent. The legislator was worried about it, and so overturned it with a basic law, which is like our constitution. And now the Supreme Court is acting as if this basic law doesn't exist. So if we just want to be precise for those knowledgeable in the details, there is a basic law, executive branch, and another law about the executive branch, and together they deal with both scenarios, but they're acting as if not. But this is just the technical question on which they are going to decide whether the results of the elections are valid. This is absolutely insane in a democracy.
But now, correct me if I'm wrong, though, because first of all, when was the Barak? You keep talking about the Aaron Barak era, and I keep reading Aaron Barak's name and how he is he's the forefather of this. Of this doctrine of unlimited powers for the Supreme Court, but I don't actually know when he was the president of the Supreme Court, when he stepped down.
I think it's 11 years now that he stepped down. I'm not sure. He was the deputy chief justice, and then the chief justice for about 10 years, or something on that scale.
And now it's Esther Hayut.
And now it's Esther Hayut. There have been a few others, and the court is built in this way that the chief justice is we know who it will be in the future, because it goes down according to seniority. So we know what the age of retirement is, and we know what the order is. And so they sometimes do tricks, like there was a conservative minister of justice, Ayelet Shaked, and she appointed a conservative judge along with, I think, 2 progressive judges, and she nominated him first. And then they went to the president's residence for their swearing in, and Esther Hayut changed the order and swore in the 2 liberals before the conservatives. So this means like 8 more years of a liberal court, because they did this something. I'm not sure about the actual numbers, but this is how it works.
That's right. And correct me if I'm wrong as well. In Israel, the judges actually appoint the judges, so it's a completely closed system. There's no legislative review or approval.
No, there is no check and no balance, and it's not exact that they appoint the judges, but they have a veto on the appointment. It used to be that they had a majority in the committee that chooses the.
Okay, so Ayelet Shaked, who was the Minister of Justice, she then chose 3, but she chose 2 who were progressive.
Yeah, because the committee is composed of members of the coalition, members of the opposition, 3 judges, and 3 or 2 lawyers, but 2 lawyers. But the judges and the lawyers together are a majority in a committee of 9. So usually the judges would come as a block, and then the lawyers don't want to upset the judges because they appear
Yeah, because they have to
So,
get that.
and then came Gidon Sar, and with an ingenious idea, created a double veto. And what he did is he said, you need 7, not
Sorry,
just.
Gidon Sar is a prominent Likud politician who came and made this proposal in what capacity?
I think he was a minister. Was it Interior, or maybe he was a minister of education? I don't remember, but he came up with this compromise that was actually brilliant, and said that you need a majority of 7 to nominate anyone, so that the politicians also have a veto. But now we are in a situation where the judges still have a veto. So imagine this judiciary, that there is no limit to its power. It can intervene in anything, and it presumes to have the final say on everything. It is composed only of very radical, I'd say almost not anti-national, but suspicious of nationalism kind of crowd. It's the globalist kind of crowd that prefers human rights to civil rights. Um, and they choose their own, more or less, or veto over the choice of their own, and there is no check and no balance. So that this is, how do you describe this as a democracy? This is an oligarchy, where a very small number of people who are completely isolated from the public will make the final decision about anything. And this is, people outside Israel don't understand this. We live in a unique form of government where we have this little how do you call it in the kindergarten, where you have this sandbox, or how do you call
Sandbox.
it? Yeah, sandbox. Yeah, all my images of American children are from Peanuts. I used to be
Yeah, there
having a
used to,
great.
when I grew up, there were sandboxes, but then I think people realized that animals like to go to the bathroom and
Yeah. So we're playing in this sandbox called the Knesset, the parliament, and the actual decisions are made somewhere else. Now, let me make a final point, because this is, and I'll give you an example, because this is part of what this does, is it separates authority from accountability. So they make decisions, but they never pay the price for them, or never have to account for the price. So here's a very telling example. They got an appeal based on human rights about the minimum space for a prisoner in an Israeli jail.
okay.
So they decided very humanely and generously that a prisoner deserves at least, I don't know, 6 square meters, or I'm not sure about the number. So the state appealed and said, okay, can we at least get some time to adjust to this, because we can't do it immediately? And the court said no. And the state ended up releasing convicted felons because
Right.
we had no room for them. And if they do something, nobody comes to the judge and say, what did you do? They come to the government, say, why did you release them? And this is how things are run in this crazy country.
Were you in that speech that you gave? Where, by the way, where was that speech?
It was in Petah Tikva. I think it was the one. Was it the daylight, or was it dark?
Daylight.
Daylight. So the daylight was right outside the court, and there was, I think the next day or the day before, there was a left-wing demonstration there, very well financed by NGOs, and they stood in attention in like 2 meters that we have to stand apart from in Corona days, but with their hands behind their backs, like at attention, like in the army. They wore black shirts saying democracy, and they shouted demokratia, demo. And we saw this film, and this is like, are you trying to imitate Mussolini? Because if we had done that, we have been arrested. If our demonstration calling the court to exercise restraint had been doing that. So this is like Antifa. Israel is developing its own Antifa. But if we did anything like that, we would have been arrested for threatening the judges with violence.
Okay, now you gave an example there, which actually I had not heard about, and I thought it was amazing. This is following up on your point about authority without responsibility.
Yep.
With regard to a series of decisions about the illegal immigration into Israel, and you could walk us through that maybe, because I thought that was quite interesting. You know what I'm talking about?
Because I talked about it in the demonstration. Because there is Israel has a problem of illegal immigration. It's amazing how many things are parallel, right, in the United States and in Israel.
Well, that's
it's
why
like,
I want to bring it up. Yeah.
Yeah, we are like the miniature. And so look at us, because this is the extreme. This is where it can go. And so we have a problem of illegal immigration from Africa, based mostly from Eritrea and Sudan. And the Supreme Court had struck down every important measure the state had against this. So first, there was a measure by the Ehud Olmert government in 2007, where it was called Achzara Hama, hot return. If you catch someone crossing the border, you
Send them back over the border.
Send him back, right? So they didn't. The Supreme Court didn't rule this illegal, but it gave an injunction saying it is going to consider it. So the state understood the message, and this was abandoned. So they built a holding facility, basically an open air jail for people who crossed the border, and the Supreme Court struck that down. It struck that down gradually, because it reduced the number of days that you can hold people there, and then it got the state also to say that it will not enforce the laws governing work by illegal immigrants. So they can work. And not only can they work, they also get social benefits. And when the state wanted to jail them for the shortest time, the Supreme Court said, look, why don't you do some, the Supreme Court also suggested the legislature what to do. And so they said, why don't you do something more humane and create a law where you basically take 20% of their salary and put it in a fund. And then when they leave the country, they get the money and they can leave with it.
To incentivize people to
leave after a while. And now the court struck that down. It struck down its own suggestion.
That's the bit I loved. The two things I love that for an American were quite surprising were, one, the court actually making a strong policy recommendation that the executive then carried out. That's as far as I know. I'm not a great scholar of American jurisprudence, but I never heard of that. And then finding its own suggestion illegal was fantastic.
And it struck it down. I don't think even they said it was illegal. They're now just saying it's not humane, because the thing is, they've gotten us used to the idea. Someone who doesn't understand anything about politics and is also not very intelligent, with whom I had a conversation, finally told me, look, if we weaken the Supreme Court, how would politics...
You do know this is recorded and put on the web. So when you say, I was talking to an idiot,
So I was talking to this idiot who will very likely not hear this. And he very likely doesn't remember he said it. But it was very telling, because he said, how will you make sure politics is moral if you don't have the moral authority of the court? So this is what they got us used to. They're not deciding by the law. They are deciding by their moral superiority. So the law is an excuse.
But my impression is that the Supreme Court, I don't know now, because I haven't spent any significant amount of time in Israel in a very long time, but from years ago, the Supreme Court had a huge halo around it. I felt it's a sacred cow for Israelis, kind of like the military. Am I wrong about that, or is it just because I was
absolutely right.
hanging around with leftists? So this is, and still, I think the polling says that 55% of Israelis hold the court in high regard. Am I wrong about that?
I think the number is down to 50 now, and it used to be 90. So
so there's been a severe decline, but it's still more
revered.
It's still, compared to anything other than the military. I mean, it has a higher approval rating than the Knesset, I'm sure. And and other institutions. Is there any other institution that has 50% approval
I,
rating
I don't
other
know
than
now
military?
because everything has been sinking, and I think well the military is held in high regard. Um, hmm, interesting question. Let me find that out for our next
Okay,
episode.
yeah. So,
Um,
but where does that historically? I realize it's changing rapidly, and it'll probably sink below 50% soon. But where does that halo come from?
I think it used to be because they were conservative, because they knew the limits of their own power, because they didn't intervene where they thought it was controversial, because they stayed away from politics. And one of the chief justices told Barak after he retired, he said, "You're dragging the court into politics, and the price will be that it would be influenced by politics. And so it's going to be a political actor, and people are going to treat it this way, and they're going to lose their confidence." Which happens because we mostly think of the court as the uber left-wing government under which all the rest of us labor. And the immigration policy is so important because in my mind immigration policy is always a litmus test, because this is the minimal requirement of sovereignty is control of borders and deciding who becomes a resident and who not, and who
It's
becomes a
the
citizen
it's the
and who not.
minimal requirement of citizenship,
Yeah,
and 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 allowing illegal immigration
is an attack on
on
citizenship.
citizenship. Yeah,
This is, this I've been banging this drum for a while, but these people are using human rights against civil rights, and they're not going to make us all citizens. They're going to make us all immigrants in the end, because citizenship will lose its value. And notice this is the argument. The argument is, and we see it here because the people are running this. The court is in symbiosis with NGOs, a lot of foreign money, some of it liberal American, some of it hostile to Israel from the European Union and other extreme left-wing organizations, the Soros foundations, and all the rest of them. And what they are doing is attacking the nation state. And the nation state is the one effective framework for people's control over their own fate. And they are attacking this with a manipulative argument saying, you know, here is a black illegal immigrant from Africa, and here is a white Israeli citizen, and why are we not treating them equally? This is racist. This is horrible.
right. Well,
And this is
that's
why,
the same thing they're doing here.
and this is why they don't care when Eastern European foreign workers are expelled. Last year, 2 years ago, was the year in which we expelled the largest number ever of Ukrainians and Georgians. And we haven't heard a whisper from these NGOs. But once you touch anyone with a black skin, wow, racism. And I think, you know, the court, there's something sociological to be said about this, because the court, this is someone from they call it the Liberation Front of South Tel Aviv. Because what happens is exactly like in America, who pays the price for illegal immigration? It's not the Harvard professors who promote it.
Yeah.
The people paying the price are manual workers who see their wages drop, who see their neighborhoods trashed. And in Israel, it's very extreme because these are almost exclusively young men, and they come from lawless countries. But even if they came from the most law-abiding country you can think, they were all Danes. You put too many young men without their women folk together in very low rent resident. What happens is you get crime infested.
Bad things happen. Bad things happen when
and you can't
young
say
men without families put together. Yeah.
And so crime rates skyrocket, and who pays the price? Nobody cares about. I heard this from Jonathan Yakubovich, my friend, who has an NGO from the other side for sane immigration policy. And he said, look, there's a Holocaust survivor, an old woman in this building. And now she lives in the top floor, and now the whole building has been overtaken by illegal workers. And so they don't have a co-op committee to take care of, you know, the light bulbs in the hallway. So, and her ceiling is collapsing, but there is no way to deal with it because you can't deal with it alone. And we have building committees. I don't know if you have them. It's a very, very tedious kind of local politics, you know, where we fight about a balcony, but there's no one to help her. and the she lives in a dump, and nobody, and when she complains, they say, racist, you're a racist. So it's it's the same thing everywhere, right? The elites promote this supposedly humane policy. The poor people pay the price, and the judges are a really important piece of it, because as my friend told me, who is an activist in the South Tel Aviv Liberation Front, it's a nice name. They used to be leftists when they founded it. It's amazing. It's like South Tel Aviv Liberation Front. And so they, he told me, look, the bottom of this, the judges, their peer group is other judges in other countries, and they will not have black people in cuffs. They will never allow it, because this is such a strong symbol that they can't be held responsible for it.
I saw it. I've seen that movie so many times. I saw it when I was in graduate school. There was nobody. I've always been pro-Israel. There was nobody that gave me a harder time when I was a young professor than the left-wing Israeli graduate students, because they were so eager. They were so eager to prove to their American leftist colleagues that they were good Israelis. So, but it's true anyway on all these professions, you know, in publishing and in the movies and so on. You ask yourself, you see, whenever somebody makes a patriotic movie, a nationalist movie, it makes tons of money. So you ask, why doesn't Hollywood make patriotic movies? It makes money. Because nobody wants to be in that social environment, wants to be the guy making nationalist movies. It's amazing, because you would think that the profit incentive, you know, would overcome all this, but it doesn't. Now,
no, they're zealots.
You said in that speech you gave that. By the way, did you notice this? You see that?
Yeah.
You know,
I was very much impressed.
I've been very jealous about your arm and your microphone.
It's the same. It's the same company. Did you notice that?
Yeah, but
your microphone is superior.
That's
you're on your way to be.
That's yours. That's a little 8 million. You know. No. You know, a country of 8 million people. You got a little. That's the proxy microphone. This is the superpower microphone.
Well, you still have a way to go till you're Joe Rogan.
Yes. Yeah.
I was about to suggest you call your podcast Joe Rogan, because that is a very successful name. You call it that, and people.
I should call this the Joe Rogan Experience.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
the Joe Rogan counterbalance.
One of the tricks that people do to get their videos noticed in the description on YouTube is they'll misspell something that people commonly. So I'll just call mine the Joe Rogan with an E. The Joe Rogan Experience.
Yeah.
There was a guy when I was an academic. There's another academic out there named Mike Duran, and I thought about taking his CV, all his books, and putting it on mine, and then when people would say you didn't write that, I'd say, oh, sorry, I thought I did. You know, it's just like it's an honest mistake. That's Mike Duran. But you in that speech you gave, you said demokratia mahutit.
Essential democracy.
Your substantive democracy, would it be?
That's fine too.
What is that? You just made reference to it, and
this is we talked before we started recording about the Israeli Democracy Institute. This is a very ironic name. They are one of the strongest anti-democratic but liberal forces. You see, we make this mistake because
you have to be careful. That one of the leaders of the IDI is a very good friend of mine. So
I've made a career. I've made a career not being careful, Mike. I'm not going to start now. Their vice president, Mordechai Kremnitzer, I argue with him often on the pages of Haaretz. This is also Aaron Barak. Aaron Barak created a new theory of democracy, which is designed to serve the idea that the judges are the final arbiters of anything. So the idea is this, and this is, you should read his book, The Judge in a Democratic Society. And he says this: democracy has two legs. One of them is the procedure, which is the election. And the other is the substance, which is human rights.
Okay, so substantive democracy and procedural democracy. So
yeah,
all this elections and all that,
that's just
that's
procedure.
process. That's
yeah,
but
that's
the
not
essence,
important. The essence is human rights. And note that once you pose the question in this way, it's almost instinctively you begin to ask, how do you protect the essence from the procedure, right?
Right.
Which is to say,
and that's
how
what
do
the judges are doing, making sure the procedure
doesn't
arrives
run roughshod over the essence.
And this is also then I'm just connecting up the dots, why the laws have an inner meaning that is not necessarily conveyed by the explicit
words used. I think that's a parallel. That's Barak's way of thinking. You know, I once quipped that when Barak wants to attack anything, he calls its opposites its essence. So now, in order to promote the essence, you name essence, what is the opposite of democracy, and now you protect the essence from the original thing. And this is always the way he argues. But the thing is that what they've done, it's very simple. If you taught political science, right, or political philosophy, I do too.
No, I taught about my parents' divorce. I just put I was always talking about myself. I just put it
in a different idiom.
Yeah.
So, but if you use the idiom of political science, that you would note that for Barak, the essence of democracy is really liberalism, and democracy is the enemy, and liberalism is the core. And as I've argued repeatedly, because I'm not an anti-liberal, I'm a conservative, but I'm not against individual liberties. To the contrary, but they have reduced both, because for them, human rights are freedom from interference. And for us Democrats, the most important human right is your share in sovereignty, is that you're sovereign over yourself. And Barak, what he really wants, and what he made Israel, he revolutionized our system of government, that we have an enlightened tyranny of judges.
When did people start when did people start recognizing that this concept of substantive or essential democracy was a threat to
democracy?
To democracy, yeah.
To actual democracy. I don't know where the terms came into focus, but people have been writing against judicial activism. I've been writing against it for 15 years. I just found a piece I wrote I was writing then for a very marginal paper, but I wrote a little op-ed in 2007 saying that these judges will end up one day trying to rule whether the results of the elections are reasonable in their judgment. This is happening.
I didn't notice it as a big issue in Israeli politics, or a major issue, until Ayelet Shaked wrote a big article about it. I can't remember. That was maybe 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Or do I have it wrong?
It might have been. She was then Minister of Justice.
Yeah, and when did it become big?
First of all, there were always people trying to control or trying to limit the Supreme Court. And usually what happened is that, and this is the most frightening thing about it all, usually mysteriously they got indicted for some criminal charges. So they were removed from. I just interviewed on my podcast, I interviewed Chaim Ramon, who was removed by a charge of sexual assault, which seems to have been at least wildly exaggerated. But this is not the clearest cut case. There were very clear cut cases in which they opened ridiculous investigations of people who were appointed to the post of Minister of Justice. And this is our president, Rubi Rivlin, He called it, he was the one to coin the name, the rule of law gang. These are, he said, the rule of law gang, and they are lawless because they opened an investigation, which he says was designed to prevent him from becoming Minister of Justice. It worked. They kept it open for 2 years or 3 years. They kept it open as long as he was in government, and he couldn't do anything. And when he when he was when the threat was over, they just closed it. And the incoming Attorney General thought that, said when he came on the heels of this episode, he said that he found in the prosecution at the Attorney General's office, they said they mark targets. And so this is, again, speaking of America, now that the whole Flynn investigation is coming out, and the whole, the behavior of the FBI and all these things. But in Israel, unlike in America, these, like I said, there are no checks and balances. So there is no power that can restrain them. So when they decide to open an investigation, you cannot do anything. When they decide to indict you, you cannot do anything. When they do dirty tricks, because we don't have, one thing we don't have in Israel is, I just read this splendid book by your acquaintance, Lee Smith, called The Plot Against the President. And
he's not just my acquaintance. I sometimes call him my friend.
Wow. So I envy you, because I read this book and I thought, wow, this is an amazing journalist. And this book is, for those who don't know, it's about the way Devin Nunes zeroed in on this thing and wouldn't let it go. But you have overseeing committees, and we don't. It's like I said, there is nothing, there is no force that can supervise these people. And so when all is said and done, when people tell me, look, what's happening here, people believe that the Netanyahu investigations are like the Russiagate. Many believe, his voters believe that.
I want to talk to you about two things. I want to go back at some point to substantive democracy, because I want to make a point about that and get your views. But let's I'm just saying that because I don't want to forget. But on this issue of the indictments against Netanyahu, what is your feeling? Are these politically motivated, or are they real?
I'll say this. My feeling is that people on the other side of the divide are not being investigated for things as serious as the indictments against Netanyahu. Now, all these things are not clear cut. And it was always my view, I don't necessarily know all the legal details, but it has always been my view that if you remove a prime minister from office, it has to be a very, very clear offense, and it has to be clearly understood by the public, and it has to be very serious. Now, what they are saying is that he approved some merger in order to be bribed by positive coverage at some remote news site. And there's a whole indictment built on that. And people are looking at this and say, never in the history of the world has positive coverage become a bribe, because what are you going to do then? What are we going to get Big Brother's fingers now into all journalism? And whenever Mike Duran in Counterbalance says something either positive or negative about a sitting president, we would say that he's either threatening or bribing him. This is, it's a crazy thing.
But that's not so crazy, because the power the Counterbalance has. I mean, we can topple governments from here. So
that's what I'm saying. There's no counterbalance in Israel. We don't have anything parallel to that. We have things like, the minor players, like we don't have Fox News, but we have CNN kind of.
Yeah, those 12. small channels.
Yeah, MSNBC style. So they're all left wing.
Sorry to interrupt you. But
so the indictment.
Did you notice that?
Yeah. The counter and the balance.
Yeah.
And so I think I joked for a while, saying that the logic behind these Puritans in the DA's office is that their logic says Netanyahu is corrupt, or else we'll have a binational state. This is the heart of it. So, but I think they believe it. And some of these people are my friends. You know, I grew up with them because I grew up in the Jerusalem elite.
You have to unpack that statement for the Americans among our.
They think that they are saving Zionism from binationalism because they think if we don't,
because Netanyahu is captured by the settlers, there will be no two-state solution.
We will not separate from the Palestinians.
So we have to get rid of Netanyahu in order to have a two-state solution, and unfortunately we can't make that happen at the ballot box. So we have to do it through indictment.
Yeah. So, but this is, I can't say that I've proven it. I've sounded that hypothesis a few times. But I am convinced that the accusations are not serious enough. I'm also convinced that there were serious allegations against Benny Gantz and they were not investigated. And so the main impression is, you know, maybe there's a very strict standard by which Netanyahu should be indicted. And not just to be fair, there are two other indictments which we can't go in, we don't have time to go into, and I'm not an expert on. But if this is the harsh standard you apply, you can apply it only to one side of the political divide. And then you had an election after the indictments, and half the citizenry of Israel, more or less, voted for Netanyahu after they knew what he's indicted for. So it's not convincing. We have not been convinced that he is corrupt. But the one last point I want to make about this is that, you know, for Americans, it's natural that if you need to remove a sitting president, it's not enough that a bunch of prosecutors will submit an indictment and some other functionary, we have the legal counsel to the government, who's also the Attorney General of Israel, decide that he's indicted and he will be removed. In America, it's even unthinkable that 3 judges will decide that he can be removed, which is the case in Israel. But when I tell Israelis that in order to those who thinks it's natural that the judiciary employs absolute justice, I tell them, you know, in a real democracy like America, only the legislature can remove a sitting president. You can't do that. You can't have 3 judges pronouncing that the will of the people is null and void. And we have come to accept that.
Well, this is the thing that I think, you called me a political scientist before. I'm not, and I'm not a legal scholar, but the thing that really seems to me to be, I don't know if it's unique, but it's out of the ordinary, certainly, is that there's no legislative review of the legal processes. And you said before, you explained that there's this committee that chooses the judges, but the judges are not, you don't have to get, you don't have to have a majority of the Knesset vote in favor of the.
No. Not at all. No, they are representatives of a very tiny minority of the old elite.
So the chance of legal reform, there's certainly not going to be any as long as there's this two-headed beast of Likud and blue and white, right? This is legal reform is not on the agenda. Am I right?
Yeah, and I'm afraid it would not be even if Netanyahu has a majority, because it became personal, because now it's easy for them to make the case that Netanyahu is attacking the rule of law in order to free himself. I don't know how many times I've heard that. So I, for a long time, supported Netanyahu in doing that. And I said that someone who is not indicted would not take the risk. They're too strong. But then I'm now convinced that if you don't have an overwhelming majority, you can't do that without losing the public trust yourself. So it's a bind.
The other thing that really has stood out to me, and you'll have to explain this to me, because I just see references to it in articles that people write, is there are legal advisors in every government office. And is this right? And the legal advisors are sort of all looking. They're part of the judicial system. They're not just somebody inside the.
Absolutely.
And they're all looking to the Supreme Court. So yeah. So the Supreme Court is influencing the policies and behavior of these bureaucracies without ever having a case in front of it.
Yeah. So when people tell you, oh, the Israeli court is not that activist, there's not such a great number of laws that it struck down. It has many other ways. It can issue injunctions. It can accept things for debate. It can make policy recommendations. But as you say, its most potent weapon is the legal advisors to the ministries, because the legal advisors to the ministries have developed a veto over policy. And the way they do it is, you're a minister and you want to institute a policy, some social policy. And so your legal advisor says, I'm sorry, I'm not going to defend that in court. It's indefensible in court.
Mm.
So in a proper government, it should be that the advisor to the minister says, look, there's a legal problem with this. And the minister says, well, I'll take the responsibility for that. And if there's later a problem, it will be appealed and the court will whatever. But these people are actually vetoing this in the name of what they know the judges would think. And when you remember how small Israel is, and you remember these people, it's the same milieu. They went to the same universities. They went to the same Leslie Wexner programs in Harvard. You know, the Wexner Foundation here created a network of high-ranking public officials.
I'm not familiar with the Wexner program. Is this a scholarship program that sends?
It's a scholarship program for civil servants. This Leslie Wexner is the great benefactor of the public service here. Wexner runs scholarships for high-ranking public servants. So they are all in the Wexner network, and they all know each other, and they have their WhatsApp groups, and occasionally something leaks from there.
This is so horrible. You know, I heard this story from Israel last year or the year before. There was a guy, a kid, he's like 16 years old, and he broke his leg or something. He went to the hospital, and one of the nurses had sexual relations with him, and they then it became known that this happened, and there was a press conference with the president of the head of the hospital, and they asked the head of the hospital, was she going to be fired for this, you know, harassment of this 16-year-old boy? And he said, fired? We're not going to fire her. We're thinking about giving her a medal. This is. He said, when I was 16, this was my dream. And nothing happened to him, and nothing happened to the nurse. And I just thought, oh wow, at least there's one place in the world where all of this horrible political correctness and this like bureaucratic think that is it's like a big wet blanket over the whole Western world. But you're telling me that the light in Israel is being snuffed out, because they're sending them all over to Harvard and then they have a WhatsApp group, and this is...
Yeah, and so you know, I've been saying to people, because whenever you say deep state, they say, oh, come on, it's a right-wing conspiracy theory. I say you can stop saying deep state and just start saying the WhatsApp group, because this is how they run things. It's a WhatsApp group, and they all know each other. And when there is criticism of in the press of the Attorney General, this was leaked out, then the Attorney General himself has a mailing list in which sitting judges are included. They might be sitting in the case that is under consideration in these emails, and he's saying, we're being attacked for unfair prosecution of Netanyahu. Please help defend us in the press. And this goes out to, and on his mailing list are two sitting judges.
Yeah, we have
who may be sitting in the case of Netanyahu.
This has been the amazing thing. I don't know if you happened to see that my interview with Hakeem Alptekin, who's indicted with General Flynn. He told me some stories. I think actually, I'm not sure that they were on tape. I better not say anything he doesn't want to say, but stories about people being connected to each other who did not seem like they were, and then as time went on, so that they were all kind of working together, or it's as much, it doesn't have to be a conspiracy, it's just sociological. They all know each other, they all know how each other feel, and they're worried about how the other is going to see them, so it becomes very incestuous at a certain point.
And if you always think of Glenn Beck, you have a blackboard and he knows her, but it's not always untrue. It's not always untrue.
No.
And
There's a lot. It's not always untrue. This is the amazing thing. And then there's of course the connections with the media, right? Ben Rhodes's brother was the head of CBS News, and Valerie Jarrett's daughter was reporting on the Iran deal and that. So it's a
very, even in a big place like America, if you take a hub like Harvard University, or all the Ivy League, it's not such a big population. They know each other.
It's not. This has been a shocking thing to me to find out, because America is so big. I had in a personal way, this came home to me. There was a group that wanted me to come speak. I used to, during the fight over the Iran nuclear deal, they wanted me to come speak, and I had a scheduling conflict, and I couldn't go, and they were really eager to get me, and they kept telling me, we really want you, we really want you. And I love myself, I think I'm fantastic, but I was a little surprised at how eager they were to get me. And I said, I don't understand. I am wonderful, but why are you so eager to get me? And they said, because there really isn't anyone else. And I said, well, wait, there's so and so. They said, yeah, he can't do it. He just did something else with us. And I said, when there's so and so, and they said, yeah, can't do him for another reason. And then I realized that was it. That was it. A country there are tons of people that know the issue as well as I do. There are tons of people that can make the arguments well, but among the universe of people that knew the issues, could make the arguments, and would do it in public, and it was a very small number. And I was talking to a friend of mine about this who comes from Omaha. And he said, the amazing thing about Omaha is, it's a major city. I mean, it's a city of some significance. And what's his name? Warren Buffett is from there. So, he's one of the richest guys in the world. And they have everything in Omaha to allow the people of Omaha to think totally for themselves about anything. But they don't. On politics, they look to Washington. And on culture, they look to New York and Los Angeles, because he moved to New York to work in a magazine. And I said, why'd you move to New York? He said, because there's nothing in Omaha. He said, there could be, but there just isn't. It's like, they just, and so then you have, New York, Washington, LA, certain kinds of things. And as far as politics and foreign policy is concerned, it's only Washington, D.C. Man, we've been talking forever. We better stop this at some point.
Yeah.
I wanted to say one thing though before.
Yeah.
When we were talking about substantive democracy, that idea, a version of that is, of course, the EU. They have the same idea.
Exactly.
Right, and the job of the bureaucrats is to preside over substantive democracy, which includes things like minority rights and women's rights and immigration and what do you call it, equity and what do you call it when disparity
of income,
and income disparity and things like that, which elections are not dealing with, and so they have to work. The elections may be actually damaging those things, so we have to bring it all into balance.
But then, if people try to take control of their own fate again, they call them populists, and they say they're nationalists and they're fascists. And they're basically, this is, and I've been calling it for a while, anti-democratic liberalism, because it's not just a-democratic, as say Yasha Munk would have it. It's anti-democratic. Their whole way of thinking is how to protect democracy from citizens.
Right.
That's it.
And of course they all have that ideology that you mentioned at the beginning, that you said you just mentioned it with regard to the judges, but it can be expanded to anyone working in the state, that they don't have personal interests. They're above the dirty little games that everyone else is playing. They're just like the gods on Olympus who are deciding what's right and what's wrong.
And then in the end, you get the text messages from Lisa Page and Peter Strzok, and you realize they're not on the Olympus.
No, no, they're not. Of course they're not. It's fascinating to me though, how it's the same thing, and obviously it's not identical, because every country has its own particular constellation of institutions and laws and so on. But there is an elite stretching from Israel over into Europe, over into the United States, that has some form of this ideology, and it's amazing. I never realized it. We've talked about this before in one way or another.
Yeah, I think it's coming into sharp focus in the last 3 or 4 years since the rise of Trump. The Brexit, rise of Trump, we suddenly understand that there is an opposition to this globalist vision, and that globalist vision is not the best way to take care of human rights. I don't know if you want to talk about China one day in your counterbalance, but get someone Chinese or some expert on China.
I'm talking to a guy this weekend.
Huh?
Yeah.
Because this is the subject. It's this whole internationalist, global village, human rights, John Lennon Imagine thing has been the great enabler of the
some
Chinese
really nasty characters. Really nasty characters. Yeah.
And on that happy note, I guess.
All right. Well, listen. So this week I got the arm and the microphone. I got something coming next week. So
I can't wait. Lightning?
I'm not going to tell you. All right.
A guy with a boom, Mike.
Why a guy?
All right. In cinema, you have the boom guy, the guy standing with.
No, I'm saying why a guy.
Why a guy? Oh no, I don't know. You get a nurse, maybe a nurse.
Hey, watch it. All right. See you next week.
See you. Dash mit Tel Aviv.